Thank you very much, Leo. It's my pleasure to be part of such a distinguished panel this afternoon on a really important topic. It's been my experience that there's been a lot of misunderstanding around the issue of teacher tenure, which helps explain, I think, why it elicits such anger and outrage from the opponents. So I wrote a biography of Albert Shanker called Tough Liberal a number of years ago, and when I was out on book tour, inevitably the first question from the audience was, why do teacher unions protect incompetent educators? Right? That was the first issue that always came up. And just yesterday I had a piece in the New York Times about the important role that public sector unions play in our democracy. And again, kind of a torrent of irate emails about, why would I want to be defending organizations that are in the business of protecting incompetent teachers. So I think it's important that we have a nuanced discussion of this issue, and I think that's what we'll likely get today. It seems to me there's a sensible balance we need to strike on this issue of teacher tenure. As I will outline, I think tenure is incredibly important because it frees teachers to do what they need to do for children, for students. The UFT attorney, I think, had got it right when he said that tenure is not a gift to teachers, but something that allows them to do their job. At the same time, I think some tenure protections need some tweaking. In any profession that includes millions of people, inevitably there will be some who don't deserve to remain in the profession, and we have to find sensible ways for them to be removed. And this is something that I think the American Federation of Teachers in particular has been very forthright about. Al Shanker used to write columns in the New York Times where he would acknowledge that there are some lousy teachers in the profession. And his wife Edie would ask, how is the head of a union can you do that? And his response was, well, no teacher reading this thinks I'm talking about them. And Randy, you also have been really forthright on this question and have said in the past, this is a union that is not just about keeping people. We are about keeping qualified people. So that's the balance that needs to be struck on this question. But that's not the type of discussion we're seeing in the media. It's all about caricature and the idea that tenure. Is this? You want me to put it closer?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And the idea that the teacher unions are there to protect the incompetent members. There's a great young journalist who many of you may know, Dana Goldstein, who has suggested that the ineffective tenured teacher has emerged as a feared character, like crack babies or welfare queens from earlier eras. This is from the media treatment. And labor attorney Tom Gagan has said that the bad teacher meme has become so predominant that one can imagine the young Marlon Brando in a remake of On the Waterfront saying, I could have been a contender, but I got that old Miss Grundy in the first grade. Sorry, I won't do any more Marlon Brando imitations. So I want to try to do four things in the next couple of minutes. First, to explain.
But he's really great at his day job.
To explain what tenure is and what it's not. Second, talk briefly about the history of tenure. Why tenure was created for teachers in the first place. Third, talk about the importance of tenure today. And finally, to discuss briefly some ways that it might be reformed. So first, what is tenure? The critics wrongly claim that it is a lifetime guaranteed job. So Terry Moe at the Hoover Institution has said tenure means teachers, quote, who don't murder someone or molest a child or stop showing up to work are assured of being able to continue their job as long as they want. America's private sector workers can only dream of such a thing, a guaranteed, totally secure job. Well, that's false. Tenure provides teachers who have demonstrated competence after a probationary period with due process rights before being fired. So those due process rights include the right to know why a discharge is being sought by the employer and the right to have the issue decided by an impartial body. That's what tenure is. It does not prevent someone from being fired, but it does require that the employer show just cause before termination. Okay, second issue. Why was tenure developed in the first place? So in the United States, tenure was developed in 1909 in New Jersey, and it came out of the clean government movement in order to improve education for children. And there were four big reasons for why tenure came about. First, it was designed to avoid patronage hiring. So previously, you'd have a newly elected mayor come in and fire all the qualified teachers who were in place and put in his cronies, seeing the school system essentially as a jobs program. Secondly, tenure was provided to protect teachers from improper political influence over their activities outside of the classroom. So for example, in Chicago, you had a board president who would fire people for being involved in a union. During World War I, there were Quaker teachers who were fired because they weren't sufficiently supportive of the war effort. During the Civil Rights era, teachers were fired because they became members of the NAACP. So that was a second reason. A third reason tenure was provided was to protect the academic freedom of teachers in the classroom, to provide them the ability to teach evolution, for example. And fourthly, tenure was provided to protect teachers from race and sex discrimination. So during the Depression, you would have women, when they became married, fired because jobs were scarce and the school board thought they didn't need the job. After Brown versus Board of Education, you had a number of southern states eliminate tenure because they wanted the flexibility to be able to fire black teachers in newly integrated schools. Okay, the third major question, are tenure laws necessary today? Now some critics will say, now with the passage of civil rights laws, civil service protections, and labor laws, that the tenure is no longer necessary. But I think there are three central reasons why it still remains vital today. The first is that tenure strengthens the civil rights protections that we have in place and the labor law protections, because it shifts the burden of proof in the legal setting. So if you bring a civil rights lawsuit for racial discrimination, the burden is on the employee to prove that discrimination occurred, which is not always an easy thing to do, even when there's discrimination taking place. By contrast, with tenure, the burden is on the employer to provide a rationale for firing. So the burden is flipped. Secondly, tenure protects a number of abuses not covered by civil rights laws. So many people don't understand that in the United States we have employment at will. which means that you can be fired for virtually any reason other than certain protected categories. So for example, you can be fired because you are more experienced and therefore more expensive for the employer. There's no, that's, without tenure and without unions, that's perfectly legal for an employer to do. There's evidence that it's especially important for teachers to have these due process protections because they need shielding from two sets of folks in the school system. One is the parents, and the other is the groups of administrators who may have bad educational ideas. So in terms of parents, tenure protects teachers from a fundamentalist parent who doesn't want HIV prevention taught to children. It protects an English teacher who wants to assign a controversial novel that might be unpopular with certain parents. It protects a teacher against a well-connected parent who's upset that his child got a bad grade, or the parent of an particularly untalented daughter who doesn't get the lead in the play, right? Without tenure, a teacher might not risk making the proper decision. And without tenure, teachers might not stand up to parents who say they want special education students excluded from a classroom, even though the research may suggest that that's good for all kids. The other group of folks that we need to worry about are misguided principals. So for example, in Holyoke, Massachusetts, there was an administrator who came up with the idea of posting the test scores of every student publicly in order to shame those who hadn't done well. Well, there was an untenured teacher who objected and thought this wasn't the right thing to do pedagogically, and was fired for that reason. So tenure is important to give teachers the ability to stand up to bad educational ideas when they surface. And third reason tenure is still necessary today is that it's an important recruiting device. There's research, and ironically I'll cite Terry Moe, the big critic of tenure, who found when he polled teachers that having tenure was worth to them tens of thousands of dollars in compensation. So basic economics tells you that if you took away tenure, and wanted to attract the same quality of candidates among teachers, you would have to provide much higher salaries, which is unlikely to happen anytime soon. Okay, fourth and final issue I want to address is how should tenure laws be reformed? So on the one hand, I think tenure is fundamentally a sound and critical concept, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. And I think there are two possible areas where we might see reform. First is in the process of granting tenure. In places like California, essentially, tenure decisions are made after 18 months. And it's not clear to me that that's the optimal amount of time that we want to give teachers to demonstrate their craft. It may take more time than that. And providing tenure shouldn't be automatic. Not everyone should get tenure during that probationary period. And secondly, we need stronger processes for removing ineffective teachers. I think there are some jurisdictions where it takes too long to remove ineffective teachers, and it's too expensive. And this is something, by the way, that teachers agree with, right? If you poll teachers, they would like to see new mechanisms put in place for removing ineffective colleagues, even as they are strongly supportive of the basic concept of tenure. And I think the AFT has been a real leader on this by backing tenure combined with peer assistance and review programs. These, as many of you know, were first adopted in Toledo in the early 1980s. It provides for a process under which expert teachers from outside of a school will come in and seek to help struggling teachers improve their craft. But if at the end of the day a particular teacher is just not cut out for the profession, the teachers are involved in a committee that recommends termination. And this was highly controversial when first enacted, but over time has grown in acceptance. And you find higher rates of teacher termination of ineffective teachers in school districts like Montgomery County, Maryland, and Cincinnati and Toledo than you do when that use this peer review process than we see in places where the principal is in charge. Peer assistance and review is a wonderful program that has not spread as widely as it could have or should have. So I think that's one major area of reform. I'll leave you with one concluding thought, and that is that in the lawsuits that we see in California and New York challenging tenure, the plaintiffs are raising a very legitimate issue, which is that low-income kids often do get the weakest, least experienced teachers. But I think they're barking up the wrong tree in going after tenure protections, which actually make it easier to recruit strong teachers in these schools. The advocates of reducing tenure protections have been invoking Brown versus Board of Education as a metaphor for equal opportunity that they say they're on this they say they're trying to champion. But I think the tech millionaires who are investing in lawsuits attacking tenure would be much better off if they actually dealt with the issue that Brown raised, the segregation of our schools, the racial segregation and growing economic segregation that we see in our public schools that help explain why poor kids are cut off from strong teachers. That would be a much more difficult fight to invest in, but it's had some positive impact in places like Connecticut, where the schools are around Hartford are much more integrated than they were because of a lawsuit. But ultimately, that would be so much more productive than going after teachers unions and tenure. Thank you.
Thank you. Randy?